Hello, welcome back to another video lesson in astrology. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about Mars in the fifth house. To use this information, you require two charts. The first one is, of course, the basic chart, the Rasi chart, and the next one is the Bhava chart. From the Rasi chart, you get to know whether Mars is in its own sign or exalted, deep exaltation, which is Capricorn 28 degrees, or deep debilitation, which is 28 degrees Cancer. Whether Mars is in its Mula Trikona, which is the first 12 degrees of Aries. Whether Mars occupies the sign of its friends, and the friends of Mars are the Moon, Jupiter, and the Sun. And whether Mars occupies the sign of its enemy, Mercury. There are two signs for Mercury, and that is Mars in Gemini or Mars in Virgo. Mars is not comfortable being in these two signs because Mars is the red planet and it hates to be in the green. And the green signs are Gemini and Virgo. Also, if you want to know whether Mars is with malefics like Rahu or Ketu or Saturn, all this is to be known only from the Rasi chart. Even aspects, conjunctions, everything is to be known only from the Rasi chart. Then what is the Bhava chart or the Chalit chart to be used for? The Bhava chart or the Chalit chart is just used to know which house Mars is in. That's it. Beyond that, there is no other use of the Bhava chart. I hope I have made this very clear, and so let's move on to the green board. Before going into what Sage Bhrigu has stated in Bhrigu Sutra, let me tell you a few things about Mars in the fifth house. Even without reading any book, you can guess a great deal about what Mars might do in the fifth house merely by just knowing what the fifth house signifies. Of the many things that the fifth house signifies, it primarily deals with children. So you should expect Sage Bhrigu to tell us something about the effect of Mars in the fifth house with regard to children. And the fifth house is not just the house of children, it is also the house of name, fame, status, authority, something that may be related to the kingdom, the government, or the king, or the big boss. Another important point is that you may be having Mars in the fifth house, but let's say you have a friend who has fifth house Mars. Do you think the effects would be the same? Definitely not. That's because the way Mars is in his horoscope will not be the same as it is for you. For example, your Mars might be in its own sign, or let's say exaltation, and his Mars might be in debilitation. So if you read a book on the effects of Mars in the fifth house, you will be surprised to find the other person has got different results. And because you haven't studied astrology in detail, what happens is you start blaming the science of astrology, that astrology is a science of inaccuracies and so on. Apart from the mere placement, your Mars in the fifth might be influenced by benefics, natural benefics, and your friend's Mars in the fifth might be influenced by malefics, and that makes all the difference. Out of the 12 possibilities, I'm now showing you the first possibility on the green board: ascendant, Aries ascendant, Mesha Lagna, and therefore wherever you see this ASC or ascendant is the first house, and then you go clockwise, you find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you come to this house where Mars is in the fifth house. This Mars is happy to be here because it is the house of his friend, the Sun. So you should expect more of the positive sides of Mars in the fifth than the negatives, unless you have other afflictions of Mars, let's say by Saturn. So this one would completely change the whole picture. This is Rishabha Lagna, Taurus ascendant, and you have Mars in the fifth house. This Mars is very unhappy to be here. So you can say that Mars afflicts this house because this sign belongs to Mercury. Mars here is likely to give more of the negative side of Mars being in the fifth house because Mars is in the sign of its arch rival, Mercury. They somehow don't get along well, and if you want to remember this for a lifetime, all you have to do is relate red to Mars and green to Mercury. So you know that even in traffic signals, they fight with each other. Mars here is going to bring out more of the negative sides. This one is Mithuna Lagna, Gemini ascendant, and Mars is in the fifth house. Mars is in the sign of Venus. Whenever you see Mars in the sign of Venus, you should expect more of the positive side of Mars being in the fifth house to be expressed. This one is Cancer ascendant, Karkadaga Lagna, and Mars is in its own sign. And therefore, you can confidently say that Mars is surely going to exhibit more of the positive side of Mars being in the fifth house. This is Simha Lagna, Leo ascendant, and Mars is in the sign of the best of all natural benefics, Jupiter. So you can confidently expect Mars to do well in the fifth house in this situation. This is Kanya Lagna, Virgo ascendant, and Mars in the fifth is exalted in Capricorn. And Sage Bhrigu says wonderful things about this kind of a Mars because Mars is exalted. This is Tula Lagna, Libra ascendant, and Mars in the sign of Saturn in the fifth house. Not a very good combination because Mars and Saturn, they never get along well, and it is not even exalted, and therefore you can find more of the negative side of this kind of a Mars. This is another situation of Mars being in the fifth house, but Mars is in the sign of Jupiter, best of natural benefic planets, and therefore you should expect more of the positive side of Mars to express itself. This is Sagittarius ascendant, Dhanur Lagna, and Mars in the fifth house. This is very good because Mars is in its own sign, and you should expect more of the positive side of Mars being expressed. This is Makara Lagna, Capricorn ascendant, and Mars in the fifth house is in the sign of Venus, and Venus is also a natural benefic, and usually Mars softens up a great deal in the sign of Venus, and therefore you should expect more of the positive side of Mars to be expressed in the person's life. This is Aquarius ascendant, Kumbha Lagna, and Mars in the fifth house is not good because Mars occupies the sign of Mercury, its arch rival. So this kind of a Mars is likely to express its negative side. This is Pisces ascendant, Meena Lagna, the last one, the last of the combinations, and now Mars in the fifth house is really weak because Mars is debilitated. So Mars is likely to express more of its negative side of being in the fifth house. So now let's get back to Bhrigu Sutram by Sage Bhrigu, and the translation has been done by Dr G S Kapoor. The first word Sage Bhrigu says is Nirdana for Mars in the fifth house. The native will be poor. Nirdana is poverty. The next word is Putra Abhava. It consists of two words, Putra and Abhava, and Putra means children, and Abhava is actually few or diminishing or not up to the mark, and therefore Dr. G S Kapoor translates this as the person will have few or no children. The next word is Durmargi. Marga is way and Dur is bad way, follows a bad path. Will be immoral, and Rajakopaha, and will be in the bad books of the government. You will incur the wrath of the king, the government, or the big boss. Sashte Varshe Ayudhena Kichidandakalaha. During his sixth year, he will suffer from cuts or wounds. Durvasana Jnana Shilavan. He'll be a liar but also be very intelligent or shrewd, very clever. The next word is Mayavadi. Dr. G S Kapoor missed translating this word and the next word. So when I looked up in the website spokensanskrit.de for Mayavadi, I found it is basically something to do with clever and able to deceive people, almost like a magician. Tikshanadi. For Tikshanadi, I have found the following meaning. Now we move on to conditions apply. Uche Swakshetre Putra Samriddhi Annadana Priyaha. Now this is the positive side of Mars being in the fifth house. If the planet is exalted in his own sign, Aries or Scorpio, the native will have a good number of children and will donate food to others. This is a sign of good luck. Raja Adhikarya Yogaha. Raja is the king or the big boss of government. Adhikar is top positions. That is a yoga you're going to get. And Shatru Pida, the problems caused by your enemies, troubled by your enemies. One more conditions applies. Papa Yute, Papa Kshetre, Putra Nashaha. Now he says if this kind of a Mars is in conjunction with a natural malefic or is in the house of a malefic, there will be loss of children, and he says Putra Nashaha, destruction of children. In such situations, the person's mentalities also might be affected. Buddhi Brahmshadi Rogaha. So this is translated as he will suffer from mental disorders and other such diseases or psychosomatic diseases caused by high stress. The fifth house is the house of inclination and also the heart, intelligent, wisdom. Since thoughts lead to action, the fifth house is a very important house. The fifth house is also the merits carried forward or the demerits carried forward from the past life. If the fifth house is beneficially placed, you have more merits carried forward from your past life. If the fifth house is afflicted, or if the fifth lord is really weak and afflicted, then the person has brought forward only more of demerits into the current life. The last conditions apply is Randresho Papayute Papi. Papi means a sinful person. So this is possible if this kind of a Mars joins the lord of the 8th house. In this example, you know that the 8th lord is Mercury, because the 8th house is ruled by Mercury. A Mars in the 5th is associated or afflicted further by the 8th lord. Then the person will be a brave person but may be childless, forcing the person to adopt a child. We have come to the end of this video. In case you have any doubts, please type them out in the comment section, and whenever I find the time, I'll answer them for you. And see you soon in my next video.